So with that, let's switch over to our panel, because we've got some terrific discussion here about how to operationalize a lot of the talk we've had in the session that is described as the Common Core State Standards in Career and Technical Education, Bridging the Divide Between College and Career Readiness. Our panelists are terrific. We're going to go in the form that it appears in the program. There we go. Bill Simons and then Kimberly Green will give us their views, and we get a chance to talk about them and cross-examine them. Bill Simons is an internationally recognized education reformer, speaker, and author. He helped launch the Pathways to Prosperity project at Harvard Graduate School, which, when it came out, gave everybody in CTE a warm and fuzzy feeling about things in 2008, and served as its director through June of this year. He's now working to create a Pathways Institute to help lead a national movement aimed at preparing all young Americans to lead successful lives. He was a primary author of the seminal 2011 report, Pathways to Prosperity, Meeting the Challenge of Preparing Young Americans for the 21st Century, and he's helped create the Pathways Project, which when he was a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So it made everybody excited in CTE when the Harvard Graduate School of Education said this was a great a path and we should do more of vocational education, even though we had to use that other word, vocational. And I'll introduce her now, so we'll be able to keep going. Kimberly Green, for the past 17 years, Kimberly Green has worked extensively on federal policy impacting career and technical education. Notice the ampersand has dropped out of some of the paperwork on CTE. Working closely with Congress, the administration, and a broad range of stakeholders, she represents the interests of CTE. In addition to this policy work, she's a member of a number of advisory boards and several groups, and is a real, knows a lot of information in depth about where we're going with CTE. So let me introduce you to Bill Simons first, and welcome him to the show.
Good afternoon. Is this mic on?
Yes,
okay.
And we're going to need to project and use our outside voice because we're online.
Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. What I'd like to talk to you about this afternoon is some work we've been doing for the Board of Regents right here in New York about how we can make CTE a lot more relevant to high school graduation in New York. So how this started is, last year, Steve Hamilton, who's a professor at Cornell and has worked closely with the Pathways Project, and I met with the Chancellor of Education, Merrill Tisch, and the Commissioner, John King, up in Albany. And they asked us to put together an expert group to look at how the Regents exams might be broadened out from what they are today, which is 5 academic exams that you have to pass in order to graduate from high school, to actually recognize CTE, or career education, as an integral part of a high school education. So the first thing we did was put together a nationally recognized board of experts to work on this, and a number of them are here in the room today. Kim Green was on the panel. Gene Bottoms, who you're going to be hearing from shortly from SREB, was on the group. John Bishop from Cornell, sitting right here, was involved. Chuck Saburla is somewhere here in the audience right here from the New York State Department of Education. We had several people involved from SED. And we had a number of other leading experts as well, such as Dane Lind from the Business Roundtable. So it really was a blue ribbon group. And what we did was look at, our point was to look at what would be high quality enough so that the Regents could really endorse these exams. And a starting point, though, was that we met with the State Department of Education and asked them, where are we right now in terms of the Regents exams? And I think it's fair to say that nationally, the Regents exams are considered really sort of a gold standard of what a high school diploma means. And as most of you in this room know, in order to get a Regents diploma, you have to pass 5 academic exams: English, math, science, American history, and global studies. And you have to get a score of at least 65 on each of those exams. So the first question we asked was, what does that actually signify in real terms, in terms of how these students are prepared? The answer is that of all the students who enter 9th grade in New York, 74% graduate with a Regents diploma, which sounds pretty impressive. The bad news is that only half of those students are actually ready to go to college. Only half are ready to go to college. So in other words, only about 37% of the students who enter 9th grade in New York come out ready to go to college. Now, after we did our work and our report, we met with a Blue Ribbon Commission that was appointed to review the report. That was headed up by the Chancellor Emeritus here in New York, Bob Bennett. And he said he feels that's a national disgrace, that out of all the students who enter ninth grade in New York, only 37% come out prepared to go to college. The other two-thirds, almost two-thirds, are really not prepared for much of anything. And that was the challenge facing this panel. How can we broaden the conception of high school graduation in New York to actually recognize career readiness? So with these groups of experts who spent their life looking at these issues, we narrowed down the field. Do you realize there's 900 different CTE assessments recognized by the State Department of Education? And we felt that was way too many, and certainly for a first bite at the apple. So what we did was we developed a set of criteria that would indicate that these exams really were worthy of Regents recognition. The first one is that the assessment had to provide credible evidence that a student is college and career ready, not just college ready, but also career readiness. And we define college readiness as indicating that a student has got a credential that would be recognized by a post-secondary institution here in the state of New York for either admission or advanced standing. Career readiness meant that it was recognized by employers in that industry as something that had meaning and would indicate the student might be ready to be employed. So that was the first criteria. The second was that we wanted an assessment that was really demanding and academically rigorous, and that it had some correlation with the Common Core state standards, that it measured some of those skills. The third one was that this had to be in an economic field that was relevant to the growth of the New York economy. And the final one was that it had to be psychometrically sufficient. It had to meet all of those standards that the academic exams in the Regents do as well. So that's 4 very demanding criteria. So we started with a list of 900 CTE assessments, and we boiled that down to just 13. Now, the reason we did that is we wanted to present the Regents with a concrete list of exams that they could really take a hard look at and decide whether or not this should be included as part of the Regents exam. Now, one I'd like to talk about in some detail is the ProStart National Certificate of Achievement. I was one of those this morning that was fortunate enough to go to the Food and Finance Academy, incredible school. And at Food and Finance, every student is expected to earn the ProStart National Certificate of Achievement. Now, this is developed by ProStart. It came out of the National Restaurant Association. It actually had its birth during the school-to-work era. The idea was that the Restaurant Association got together and agreed on what kind of skills and knowledge do students need who are going to enter the restaurant industry. What do we expect them to know? They developed a 2-year program of study, very comprehensive. You take a written exam at each of those 2 years. Now, if you want to get the certificate, in addition to passing those 2 exams, here in the state of New York, you also have to take a technical assessment, which was developed by one of the BOCES. And that technical assessment will measure you on things like knife skills, safety, and sanitation. So that measures your technical knowledge. The third component is that you actually need 400 hours of work-based experience in the restaurant industry, 400 hours. So it really is a very rigorous assessment. The National Restaurant Association has studied this and found out that 85% of the students who earn this certificate are still in the culinary industry 5 years later. In terms of college readiness, the ProStart certificate is recognized by the Culinary Institute of America, Johnson & Wales, and every other major culinary program in New York, and for that matter around the nation. And in terms of career readiness, the president of the New York Restaurant Association told me that students who possess this certificate are absolute gold. What he said is that the industry is facing a tremendous shortage of skilled workers, the ones who've really been trained in the industry, and that the ProStart certificate really indicates they have it. So I think that we can all agree this really is a very demanding certificate. It does recognize college readiness, it measures career readiness, and moreover, it's centrally important to New York. All of you have been here in New York City, those who don't live here. If you turn on TripAdvisor, you're going to find at least 100 restaurants within a tenth of a mile from here. There's no question this is a huge industry. What struck me when we went to Food and Finance today is that they only admit 130 students a year to that program, only 130 students. They turn away more than 1,000 students on the waiting list, and this is the only high school in the city of New York, serving all 5 boroughs, that actually focuses on the industry that's the second largest employer in the city. I mean, you talk about a disconnect between education and the workforce, it really is pretty remarkable. The quality of the instructors they have there are absolutely amazing. 92% of the graduates go on to post-secondary education, and more than 80% are actually working outside the school and getting paid for that work, by the way, when they're seniors working in the industry. So it really is a model of excellence. I think the tragedy is that it hasn't been expanded and made available to more students. But that's just one of the exams we recommended. Very quickly, the other exams we looked at were the ASE certification that's recognized by the automotive industry, again, industry developed. The A+ certification, which many of you know about, developed by CompTIA, that is globally recognized. More than 1 million people have that certificate. Network Plus certification, again, recognized by CompTIA. The National Institute of Metalworking Skills certification, the NIMS certification, for those going into machining and metalworking. The Print Ed certificate, Student Electronics Technician, Carpentry Level 1, ASK, which is Assessment of Skills and Knowledge for Business, and also 4 NOCTI exams covering different fields, including advertising and design, basic accounting, agricultural mechanics, and hospitality management. So, as we all know, what's tested is often what counts, and the recommendation that our Blue Ribbon Group made was it's really time for the regions to step up and recognize the importance of career readiness in the state of New York, and also the need to prepare all students for success, not just the 37% that are coming out of the existing system. So right now, the report we produced is before the regents. They haven't formally considered it yet, which is why I cannot share the report with you. It's still under cloaks, so to speak, but I did get permission to talk about our work. And I think that with the support of the UFT and others in this room, hopefully the regents can adopt a broader view of how we're going to prepare all students for success in New York and not just continue to use a narrow exam that's obviously not succeeding with many of the students. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Bill. Billy, there's only so many hours in the day to be able to do testing. There's 5 regions that are part of the current system. Is the idea to take one of those out or 2 of those out and replace them with something else?
Well, that's a decision that has to be made, of course, by the regents. That was beyond the purview of us. I think the feeling is that there's very strong support for the 5 existing regions, and it's unlikely that they would actually substitute one of the existing exams. They are considering sort of reformulating high school graduation in New York so that students might take much more of a pathways approach, the idea that every student would choose some kind of a pathway. This is still, in the early stages to be considered by the regents. I think what happened is the initial intent when we met with the chancellor and commissioner was to sort of take a narrow look at how CTE might be incorporated. I think as we went through it and pointed out that right now so many students are not graduating prepared for anything, the thought became, we really have to rethink high school graduation. How do we set up more of a pathway system that's going to do a better job of preparing students for success? So hopefully it's going to lead to some very exciting changes.
Terrific. Great. Kimberly.
Well, thanks for having me. As a student who did all of my schooling in the state of New York and went to the Industrial and Labor Relations School at Cornell, this is kind of a wonderful convergence of all of my educational experiences. I had the chance to go to Aviation High School, and you all probably have quotes from today. One I want to share with you because I think it underscores kind of why we're here. I asked the student, why did you pick aviation? How did you get here? And he said, I got into Stuyvesant, and so those of you from the city know what that means. He said, but I chose to go here. And the reason that I chose to go here is because this place allows me to become my best self. And that stuck with me because I think that so often we get in the way of kids being successful, and we put labels on things that prevent kids from finding their way. And as an advocate and perhaps an instigator, the child of hippies, and career technical education, I visited all 50 states. And so my job is not only to advocate for CTE in Congress, but also to push the field. And so In 2010, we convened, the members of my organization are the state directors of career technical education. So they sit in state office and oversee public CTE. And we brought them together around defining a common vision for the future of career technical education. And the reason we did that was because we saw some of the tea leaves in the reading and hoping that we would have conversations like the ones that we're having today, and wanted to make sure that the CTE community was in charge of its own destiny, not being necessarily driven by some other kind of stream or mechanism. And so this vision brought together the states, and it was an honoring of where we've been. It was a transforming of where we are and a kind of leading for the future. And a couple of things came out of that I want to share with you. One is that we did an analysis of all the state standards for career technical education. We did it at both the secondary and the post-secondary levels, and next month we're going to have a report that's going to come out. And I think, a part of the instigator in me, the truth-telling, is that we need to hold the mirror up to ourselves, and we have some work to do in CTE. When we look across the country and we look at the standards that are in place for our system, most of those are job-specific occupational standards. They prepare people for a narrow skill set, not the careers of the 21st century. We do have state standards at the secondary level almost in every state, but we have practically none at the post-secondary level. And so if we're a system that's about connecting learner levels, we have a long way to go to do that work. And yet we have many great successes around the country. One of the things that we have done collectively, 42 states, DC and Palau, came together around defining common standards for career technical education. They got unveiled last June, and we are revealing this report later this month to kind of benchmark where are states compared to these national technical standards. And what we're going to find is that there's a pretty big gap, and that we have a significant gap to close, but we have, I think, an opportunity. And when we talk about college and career readiness and the academic standards move in the Common Core state standards, I think it creates an opportunity for CTE and the academic community to start to blur the lines. And that's one thing I think, if we want to be bold about this conversation and think about the promise, we need to think about forgetting the labels. And we need to think about putting on the table teacher certification requirements. That is it kind of protecting our different silos by having a CTE certification versus an academic certification, secondary certification versus a post-secondary certification. If we think about the students and the skill sets that we need them to have as we go forward, we need to start blending the lines in a new way. And I saw that in the school that I visited today. It's happening in good places, but we've got structures, to Mike's point, that are preventing us, I think, from being able to move farther, faster. So these common standards have come out, and we have the academic standards, and they're written in such a way that it's going to make it easier for us to have a conversation across the disciplines. And so now the hard work is before us of making sure that we don't allow the academic standards movement and the momentum around the academic Common Core just to become a new set of standards. Instead, we have an opportunity for it to become a new way of teaching and learning. And that requires, I think, CTE to have a seat at the table in those conversations. We know that most states, there was a study done, and again, the report is going to come out later this month from GW, that looked at how are people defining career readiness? And this is a space that is very easily defined in the college readiness space, but in the career readiness space, there is no common answer. You have everything from teach somebody a general set of skills to those occupationally specific skills so they can be hired for a job. And until we have some agreement about what we mean about career readiness and how that fits within the college readiness agenda, again, we have two different cultures and communities that are continuing to battle one another rather than collaborating with one another for student success. So I think we have an opportunity before us. We have this, as I think Randy said yesterday, this opening, but it's also, I think, our responsibility to hold the mirror up to ourselves as a CT community and make sure that we are living the promise. We're not just trying to protect what we have, but make it available for all students. If I were to leave you with one thing, I would say, what if we imagined an education system where there was no CTE and there was no academic education, but it was the two together, and that was just what we called good education for all students. And what would that look like, and what kind of systems will we need to put in place to ensure that that happens? Randy asked me, since our government workers are furloughed, to give you 2 seconds on the Federal Perkins Act, and I will do that in 2 seconds because very little is happening. But, if you look at the kind of laundry list of all the pieces of federal legislation in the education and workforce space that are due for reauthorization, Perkins is the next one to get added to the list. We had Workforce Investment Act, that's a decade late. We've got elementary and secondary, higher ed, individuals with disabilities is coming up, and now Perkins. And so the Pollyanna in me says we've got the spectrum, right, of all the federal education and workforce legislation that can and is up for reauthorization. So we have this really amazing moment to kind of see an opportunity and connect the dots in a way that have never been able to be connected before. The reality is that the Congress looks at these things as silos. And so to Randy's point yesterday, I think we do need to look at Perkins within the realm of reauthorization, see what can we do here to push farther, faster. And the conversations that are happening on the Hill around Perkins, there are 4 big questions that I think we have to wrestle with, and if we're to work collectively on this journey, questions that we should ask ourselves. And one that's in the paper that we got, which is how do we define high-quality career technical education? How specific does the Congress need to be in defining that? How much support is needed to transform existing programs into high-quality CTE? The second is also in the paper around the space of accountability. What should we be held accountable for? And whether or not we have the appropriate assessment system to hold ourselves accountable for technical attainment. I mean, Bill talked about this issue. We've got lots of industry certifications out there, but they are not all created equal. And they do not all have the same signaling mechanism to post-secondary or to industry. And so how do we navigate those waters and make sure that what we're holding kids accountable for at the end of their high school experience is valued by the post-secondary community or the workplace? The third is an issue of equity. So right now, the law focuses primarily on gender equity. But what should and can we do to make sure that we're dealing with a federal program that can ensure equitable access regardless of zip code, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status? So how do we make that shift? And the fourth is really this notion of programs of study, about connecting learner levels, and that right now we have a system of secondary education and post-secondary education, and as we saw in our study around standards, they share little beyond the word education. They're 2 different systems. They're governed differently, they have different accountability structures, they have different accrediting entities, and so right now there is not a seamlessness, and yet we expect there to be a seamlessness among the systems. And so what do we need to do? There's a lot of interest at the federal level to make the notion of program of study, which connects the learner levels, the unit of analysis for CTE. And if we do that and send the money out in that way, what does that mean when we don't have the infrastructure to support that shift? So early conversations, I think it's probably unlikely that we'll see any movement anytime soon, but that gives us, as Randy said, the opportunity to have an imprint on how we move forward. So I'll stop there.
Terrific. Okay, we just got time for 1 or 2 questions. No questions. All right. Give them the hook. Great. Well, join me in thanking them. That is fun.